The first airplane I ever flew was a J3 Cub. And I got into the freight business. I went to work for a company called Red Baron Lines that started out as a freight company between Minneapolis and Duluth, Minnesota. And they expanded to passengers. So we had Beech 99s, Cessna 402s, and the D-18s. And we hauled passengers one way and freight and mail the other way. So I spent many nights coming into Minneapolis postal facility like at midnight, and they unloaded us and loaded us, and then we went out without radar. In Minnesota in the summertime, there was always a line of thunderstorms. So anyone that flew the mail with me would know that, or the freight. So yeah, I did that for 3 years. And then I flew for a company out of Billings called Combs Airways. And Combs was an aviation legend. Old Harry Combs was a World War I pilot. And then it ended up he owned part of Gates Learjet. It was Combs, Gates Learjet. So, and then that was about the end of my freight. I went into corporate flying, and so
how many hours did you do freight, would you say, roughly?
we were probably flying at 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. We worked, the work week then was 6 days. That's not that far back. I lived then, so it was 48-hour weeks we worked. So, and with flying, it was a little longer than that because we didn't punch a clock when we started it, and we flew, circumnavigated thunderstorms through the middle of the night. So I would say that we ended up maybe 8 or 9 hours a day, 6 days a week.
That's pretty darn grueling.
It is, it is.
So what was your most challenging, is there a story that comes to mind where you were just like, it was like white knuckle flying because it was so challenging, or because the airplane didn't quite perform like it was supposed to?
Not so much in flight, but I did have one where I started up and the regulator's right behind the head on the bulkhead behind it, and the regulator started burning on fire, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I was out there alone. But I shut the airplane down and it smoldered for a while, and then went out, but I had no help. But the regulator was bad, and it was bad because somebody, when they mounted, put a screw that went into the regulator. And in the Twin Beech, but we had a lot of ice. We had alcohol windshields, alcohol props. So I flew the C-45s. Most of them were modified to passenger or freight. But I flew to northern Minnesota, and I was kind of poor. Most male pilots were poor. Most of them, at least I was. And we'd go to Park Rapids, Minnesota was one of the stops. And there was Christmas tree farms there. So I had the C-45 that only had the rear door. We'd put the mail in, and then we'd stuff the top of the fuselage with Christmas trees. So I was bringing Christmas trees back to Minneapolis with the mail. So, and the mail guy, he just knew it when he'd come. All I had was a little storm window up, and I'd tell him, hey, I got Christmas. Oh yeah, no problem. Pull them out. That's when the post office was still pretty good. And he just stacked them up, and then when I left for home, I drove out there and picked them up and gave them to my friends. So they were the real Christmas trees. They were cut that day, so they survived Christmas and New Year's. But anyway, that was a kind of a fun time. But the most harrowing time was the regulator.
What was the most interesting cargo that you hauled, would you say? Or something that comes to mind as
quickly
kind of
would be
unusual?
baby chicks. A whole plane load up to haul them from Minneapolis to Mitchell, South Dakota. You know, with baby chicks, they start with a chicken farm, right? So we hauled about 4 loads out there, and I couldn't tell you the number, but it was full. And it was like constant music over the noise of the airplane. So.
You could hear those chicks in the
Oh
back.
yeah. They weren't happy. They were hungry probably too, but Yeah, other than that was like we hauled freight. Sometimes we had a extra run for Ford Motor Company. We would haul seatbelt parts from St. Paul to Chicago. That type of thing. That was just normal. That was normal, but that wasn't along a scheduled route. All the others were scheduled routes. Occasionally, we'd do a charter trip with it.
So what was one instance where you really had to rely on your quick thinking and your just kind of resourcefulness to address a situation when you were flying freight?
Well, that was kind of like a common thing. One of the stops was Bemidji, Minnesota. And we had no one on the ground. We just did the old VOR approaches. And when I landed, but the Twin Beech is very good in the deep snow. They'll almost kind of float on deep. So I probably had a foot of snow on the runway, and it handled it really well. Yeah. So that was quick thinking. I was there. I broke out of the clouds, and I didn't want to go back out and haul the freight somewhere else. So I did it. It really worked well. Taxied well.
Did you know going into it though that the Beech was going to handle that much snow?
Yeah, we did. We kind of knew,
Okay.
but I didn't. That was my first time. Other pilots told me what they would do. You know how they'd handle it. And, hey, you're going up there. There's nobody out there at midnight except the mail guy comes out with the mail truck, and maybe a shovel if he gets stuck. But I taxied right up there. It took a little extra power, and I took off. You know.
So it sounds like there's kind of this brotherhood of pilot, you know, the freight pilots, and they kind of look out for one another simply because, you know, you don't have the support on the ground. Is that kind of how it was?
And you were alone. There was we couldn't get radar coverage. Center mites could have helped us, but wouldn't. They just said, well, we don't have radar coverage out there. If we asked what kind of cells, if we deviated what we're at when we come around, this one we deviated the route for. But one of the, I got to know them all as friends, and most of them have died. There's one that was a little unusual. Jerry Wilson was his name. He was flying mail mostly for us to Wisconsin. Ended up in Green Bay, but it was Wausau and different. So we all kind of went on our way. Got, you know, we were all seeking better lives, better jobs. Well, he got into flying DC-7s, hauling marijuana from Mexico, and he landed on a road in Kansas, a DC-7. So in the morning, the farmers woke up, and here sits a DC-7 full of marijuana. And Jerry took off and got away. He got away. And he was a nice guy. Is it okay if I tell you this story? Well, Jerry Wilson went on to invent and market Soloflex. And he ended up owning about 10 airplanes. But he made his wealth with Soloflex. So I got to meet up with him. He had helicopters and jets and a fairly big company. And I know it's sold, but I'm not sure what it went to. But Soloflex was the premier muscle builder and used band, so you had constant pull through the system where it wasn't like direct. So that's about all I know about him. I run into him, and he had a good family, and we laugh about that DC-7 thing.
Wow.
So
landed on the road.
Yeah, we were on a gravel road, central Kansas.
Wow,
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
So I would say he was probably good with the DC-7 because he flew, we call them C-45s. But they were D-18s, but we did have a Super 18 like he's got out here. Super 18 has 3-bladed props and a couple other mods. It's a higher cabin, yeah. So like the one that sits out here, the white one. So.
What is it about the Twin Beech that kind of makes it special, would you say?
It's a real man's airplane. It really is. We did, you know, the temperature is controlled by shutters. The oil temperature is controlled by shutters. Everything is manual. Cold weather up there, we'd start up, and the oil was heavy in the tank, in the oil tank. It didn't have like an engine sump that it has today. So you could bypass the cooler. And if the temperature started coming up on you, you could open it and start taking a little oil, congealed oil out of the tank and run it through the cooler to bring the temperature down. So yeah, it was a good airplane. It was nice to fly. I had a lot of confidence in it. You had to be very good at tail wheel flying. And it had the locking tail wheel. So you went to VMC or just below VMC with the tail wheel lock, and then quickly brought the rudders up, or brought the raised the tail to get the rudders in the air in case you lose an engine, and it was controlled by the rudder and the power. So I learned a lot. I've been a flight instructor for 64 years. This Christmas Day it'll be 64 years. So there's some things you could do with a twin Beech that you do with others, but they don't teach it. So tailwheel airplanes have a tendency to want to weather vane or turn into the wind, and you could do that and run out of rudder maybe. But you can use the ailerons. You can actually, on a twin Beech, you can actually use the ailerons to control directional control on the runway, on the ground.
I didn't know that.
Yep, because the rudders are a little small, so you need that help with the ailerons. They have big ailerons and a lot of drag and a good wingspan. So all the Beech pilots you talk to will tell you that. So I applied that on all small Piper Cubs and whatever tailwheel airplanes. It works. With a stick, you can actually control the direction without even touching the rudder. So.
Cool. That's cool. Is there anything else that you can think of?
So you flew freight then you went to the corporate world and flew corporate jets or corporate everything?
Yep, everything. Helicopters. I'm a helicopter instructor. So I didn't stop.
Yeah.
But the freight was the way to get you out of flight instructing. But I did a lot of flight instructing too while I was flying freight. But it was well, let's see, made your life a little easier, a little more money.
Yeah, well, the freight was your ticket more or less to get the hours.
Oh sure,
Up into
Yep.
less than a 6-day-a-week jump
Yep,
up.
most of my life I was always too young to be a pilot. You had to be, and then when I was old, then you're too old to be a pilot. So